Hi everyone. Well, it's time to start the teardown of the engine block now. I've got the heads off of my last video, so now I'm ready to take down the block, pull the oil pan, the pistons, and get all that stuff taken out of the engine, inspect it, and start checking what I need to order. I need to start getting some pistons in, some rings, bearings and whatnot. I'm also going to need to figure out what needs to be done at the machine shop. So this is kind of going to be a simple teardown, but then I'm also going to start getting into either this video or next video, starting to get into how to measure clearances in the engine and really determine what needs to be ordered, what needs to be replaced, what needs to be fixed, that kind of stuff. So let's get going on this teardown and hope you enjoy. Alright guys, before we start tearing into this block, pulling the pistons out, yanking the crankshaft and all, I wanted to give you a quick overview of what this looks like running, what it looks like as it's moving along. So I've got the timing pulley and I've got the pulley boss reattached on the front of the crankshaft here, along with the crankshaft bolt, and I've got my ratchet. And what I can do is rotate this ratchet, and as I do it, these pistons will move. So I'm going to start spinning this, and this is in a clockwise direction. And you can see these pistons here moving up and down inside the cylinders. Now as I move this, you can see that the pistons are moving in pairs, and you might think that that's how they fire. You might think that as this comes up, these two pistons fire and then these two pistons fire, and that's actually not how it goes. So the firing order according to the manual in this engine is 1, 3, 4, 2. So according to this manual, as this piston here approaches TDC, this piston fires 1, and then the next set of pistons come up, 3 fires, and then the next set comes up, piston 4 fires, and then piston 2 fires, and then repeats back to piston 1 firing. So each one of these pistons on each cycle, where 2 pistons come up, only one of them is actually firing. The other one is performing a different part of the cycle. So at any time, you've only got a single piston, a single cylinder firing, and that evens out the engine, makes it run smoother, so you don't get a lot of shaking, a lot of vibration, because you've got small pulses rotating the engine as opposed to larger pulses. That's why large V-twin motorcycles tend to rumble and shake a little bit more than a 4-cylinder motorcycle, which runs a lot smoother. So that's how this whole thing operates. So now let's go ahead and start tearing into this. I'm going to move you over to the front so we can take this water pump off. Alright, I got you guys zoomed in here on this water pump, so I'm going to go ahead and pull this off now. It's 4 12mm bolts, so I'm just going to start at the bottom, crack these loose. And this water pump assembly is this whole area right here. Go ahead and remove these bolts now. Should be a gasket holding it on. Alright, these are all the same size bolt. Go ahead and see if we can't. Oh, yep, it came right off. Perfect. And there you go. That's the inside of the water pump. You can see the impeller from the side. This all looks good, but I will be replacing it anyways. I've got a new one on the shelf. Alright, I am close to 100% sure that I'm going to have a mess on my hands when I rotate this engine over. So I've put my oil pan beneath it. Hopefully that's going to catch anything that comes out. So let's go ahead and try to rotate this bad boy. I'm going to rotate it forward since that's the oil outlets are, so any oil that's remaining will hopefully pour out of there and into my pan, which it is already doing. The other thing is I see a bunch of coolant in the cylinders still, so what I'm going to do is rotate this forward until I just start to see it, hopefully. Alright, and let us see if we can get this to Whoop. Okay, that's a little bit, no big deal. I've got the cardboard down beneath it. My main concern is the oil, so this pan is specifically for coolant, so I will hold this here as I continue to rotate this. Hopefully I can catch any coolant. And I've got a little oil in there, no big deal. It's kind of expected. Got a little oil, a little coolant here. I'm just doing my best here not to mix the two since they're hard to separate later on. All right, that is going to be it right there. Still dripping a little, but I still have that cardboard down beneath it, so any drips will be caught by the cardboard, so they're not going to hit the floor. So now I got a pretty good look at the bottom of the engine. So let me get you guys over there and you can see what we actually have to do to get this off. All right, so here is the manual. Just a quick look at this shows, it says to remove the bolts, and then you have to break the baffle loose. So there's actually a baffle here in these pictures that's positioned between the oil pan and the engine casting itself, so the block casting. It's actually sandwiched in there from what they're saying. So we'll have to pry that out of there a little bit is what it's saying, to use a chisel or something similar to break those two free. So let me get started on getting these bolts out and we'll see how much work it's going to be to get that pan separated. Now we have to get all these bolts out of here and they look symmetrical. So I know you can't see the other side, but it's identical to the side that you're seeing right here. So these are all 10mm bolts and I've got my 10mm socket. Just double check, that is 10. So I should, according to the manual, just be able to go ahead and remove all these bolts. Got a couple special bolts, starting with these guys. These are going to be extremely long bolts because they pass all the way through this face and into the block. This is where the flywheel and the clutch go on this end, so they're extremely long bolts. These should all be a similar size, so they're also coming out a lot easier. I'm just gonna go ahead and loosen these all up so that I can come back with just this extension and reach them all. And there's no special order to tighten or loosen. According to the manual, it says just to tighten them up. Or loosen them, sorry. When I go to put this back on though, I will make sure that it goes on straight. Now this also needs sealant on it, and I can see a bunch of silicone oozing out. So I know that there's some type of sealant used on these, and I'm gonna have to get some of that, put this back on when I reassemble the engine. So I'll go ahead and start with these long ones. So it turns out I was correct. All of these bolts are the same size except for the two at the flywheel side. Those are the long ones. So now I need to look at a little bit at how to pry this up off of here. I think I can just wedge something in between this slot and pull up, which appears to be what the manual is telling me to do. I'm gonna double check and I'll be right back. Now, as far as I can tell, this is the area that they're talking about, where there is a place to get in here and pry these apart. I looked at this and there's no other way. The baffle is sandwiched so tightly, there's no way I can get anything in there to pry that apart. Now, they say to use a woodworking chisel, and I believe that they mean that because there's a slight gap, and a chisel can be fit into here and slowly pushed in or tapped in. So what I'm gonna do is I have a pry bar, and I'm just gonna use that in a similar fashion. So I'm just gonna kind of put this in here and very gently pull up on this. Oh, I think that did it. Okay, that's moving. I'm not going to go too crazy on this side. I want to make sure that I get it from both sides here. So let me come over to this other side and do a similar thing. I'm going to rotate you guys slightly. There we go. I'm going to have to gently pry up. It's probably going to rotate this engine too, of course. There we go. Okay, that's it. Alright, looks like it's free. Let me reposition really quick. Alright, moment of truth. I'm going to try to lift this end off. It does seem to be loose. Now the only thing is that this other end may or may not be broken loose yet. So I do have this putty knife. It's actually more of a scraper that I'm going to kind of wedge into here and just make sure that, there we go, I just heard a little bit more break loose on this side. Same there, okay. So I believe it's fully loose now. So I'm gonna go ahead and lift this carefully off because there are probably, yep. All right, nice. So there's the inside of the oil pan, and set that aside. And there is the baffle that sandwiches between that. So we can see there's a seal all around the oil pan where the oil pan mates to this baffle, and this baffle is a sandwich between the oil pan and the block. So that's why we had to remove all of that and pry the oil pan away from the baffle. Next up, we'll be taking this whole assembly out, so we'll have to take off the pickup tube and all the bolts holding down the baffle, and then pry the baffle off in the same fashion. Next thing we've got to do is pull the oil pickup tube off, which is two 10mm bolts and one 10mm bolt right here. So, break these loose. Should just be able to pop these off. Big surprise that all these fasteners are coming out really easy. They just basically sit in oil all day, so. Okay, this pickup tube should kind of come right off, just like that. It's interesting, because I kind of expected there to be a little O-ring or something inside of here, but there's not. I guess it's not a big deal. Oh, there's a little gasket, that's what it is. There's a small gasket on here that holds that in. Alright, so next we've got to take the baffle off. Now this baffle, my manual differs because for the NA, these bolts don't seem to exist looking in the drawings. So it appears that I've got to take off these 8 spline bolts before I can get the baffle off because they all tie it onto it looks like the caps. And I've got my 8mm here, and that fits right on there. So 8mm it is. Let me grab my extension. See if I can break these loose. Now one of the things I'm going to have to do is locate the torque specs when I put these back together, since these NA manuals will not have the correct specs for these bolts, since these bolts don't exist. Alright, those are all loose. Now I'm going to go ahead and take these out. These really doesn't matter where these go because these are just holding this baffle and they're not holding anything important. I say that like the baffle's not important, but what I mean is that they're not holding in something that's torqued to a very specific spec, like that has bearings in it, such as the crankshaft or the camshafts, or the valve system. Those are all have to be labeled as to where they go, where they come from, so that when you put them back, they go back in their respective places. What's interesting is that these spline bolts come out just fine with a standard 6-sided or 6-point socket, whereas the head bolts did not. They would not come out in that fashion. Now the next part of this is that I have to remove the baffle, and the way they say to do it is to just slide a chisel up into there and pry it out. I've actually got a very small hammer here. This is actually a copper hammer, but it's a very small hammer because I don't want to damage any of this unintentionally. So I'm going to use some very gentle tapping here to see if I can't. Okay, it looks like that's working. Perfect. So that slid right in. And that means that I'm going to kind of pull up a little bit. And I'm going to slowly slide this along the inside here. And this is also going to be, one of the things it's going to do is cut that silicone free. And I'm also going to pry with it a little bit. So I'm going to lift this end up while I do it. So that should help. And I'll come back to this side. Whoops. And push this down through to cut this silicone free. All right, perfect. So now I'm going to pop this end seal off. There we go. And now this baffle should lift right out. Perfect. All right, we're in there. Now we can see all of the crankshaft. So we've got the crankshaft, there's the connecting rods, the caps on the connecting rods. Then these are the main caps. So these are what hold the crankshaft into the block. Once these come out, the whole crankshaft lifts out. But we've also got to undo these caps on the connecting rods, because that will release the connecting rods from the crankshaft and allow that pulling the piston out of the engine. So I'm going to have to reference the manual, but I believe what it states is first we've got to pull the oil pump off the front here. So let me swing around and we'll pull that off. All right, next up we've got the oil pump, and that is 6, I want to say 1, 2, 3. I'm only seeing 5. I might have already taken one out or something, but I'm going to start with getting those out of there. So grab my 12 millimeter, and there we go. Start breaking all of these loose. Oh, some of these are really in there. I think that one's already loose. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yep. Okay. Go ahead and pull all of these out. One thing I do want to be careful of is length, because I see some of these are shouldered and some are not. So kind of use this video to guide me as I reinstall the oil pump. I've got a new oil pump as well. It's got billet gears, and it's also been, the pressure has been increased on it. Let me rotate this back a little bit, make sure we're kind of back in frame. All right, this bottom one, short. This guy is slightly longer. This one is also longer. This is really long, shouldered. And this guy is also the same length as the other one. So we've got one short one and one long one. Now looking at this, reading what it says in the manual, this should just kind of come out of here. And it says to tap it with a mallet if it's not being cooperative. Yeah, that is not wanting to move. Got my nylon hammer. Just gonna go ahead and pick a spot on here that I can reach. Okay, it's starting to move. All right. Before I get this too cockeyed, I'm going to come over to the other side and gently tap up here. What's holding it on is this front main seal. So I might have to wiggle this off. Perfect. And there you've got the oil pump. It was driven via those two flats that exist on the crankshaft. Now, a quick little note, the manual also says to remove the bolts down inside here to pull the rear main seal off. This is the side the flywheel attaches to. This whole piece of metal back here is removed with those 4 bolts, but it's going to be a little difficult to get in there. So I'm going to have to grab Probably a wrench and pop those free. Yeah, it looks like I can just barely get into there. And a little bit of an angle, but it shouldn't matter too much because I'm pretty much fully on the bolt. Do the same over here. Okay, that's loose. Now, yeah, it looks like I'll be able to get into there. Okay. So those are all loosened up. So, interesting thing to note here, the two top ones are the long ones, and the short, I'm guessing, are gonna, or sorry, this is oriented upside down. So the two bottom, the wide spread bolts are gonna be the longer two, and then the ones closer to the top are gonna be the short. Now, since we're gonna be reusing the crankshaft, as it's already a billet crankshaft, and it's actually very strong from the factory, because we're gonna be reusing it, it's a good idea to go ahead and just check all the things that we can while this is still assembled, because it's going to give us information like how much play there is in the connecting rods, how much play there is back and forth in the crankshaft itself, how worn the thrust bearing is, which is something I'm going to measure right now. And that'll kind of give an indication of just how worn the crankshaft and its associated bearings have seen. So kind of just a wear indicator to see how much wear in general this engine has seen. So what I've got set up right now is the test to see how much end play there is in the crankshaft. And what this test does is that it allows us to check how much movement there is in the crankshaft. So the crankshaft has the ability to slide back and forth in here, a very slight amount. And that amount is what we're going to measure. So if it's larger than a certain amount, then we know that there's a problem either with the thrust bearing or with the crankshaft itself. There's wear somewhere over a certain tolerance. So we have a certain tolerance for how much play there can be, and if it's over that, we know that one of the two things, either the thrust bearings or the crankshaft, has worn beyond that spec. So just to show you kind of how this is, I've got a dial indicator set up. I have a Noga arm attached to the block here. Since it's a cast iron block, it's a magnetic arm here. This comes up to a dial indicator, and this measures half thousandths. So each gradation in here is a half thousandths. Now right now, just looking at this, we're pretty much on zero, and I can touch it a little bit. Half thousandths is pretty small, especially for an arm this big. And this is just a cheap, $15 dial indicator. So what I'm going to do is, since this is at zero, I'm going to go ahead and push on the other end. So I'm going to push from the flywheel end of the crankshaft, right where the flywheel bolts on, and I'm going to push it towards this end. This is the front of the block. So as I do this, what you're going to see is this indicator move a little bit. There you go. Let me get you guys in closer, and I'll show you this indicator just so you can see up close exactly what it's doing. So you can see right now we're at zero, and I'm going to go ahead and push on this, and you see we've moved forward. So this is 5, half, 6, half thousand, almost just barely under 6.5 thousandths. So as I push on this, you can see that's the end play we're getting, and it always registers right there about 6.5 thousandths. So now, by measuring this and looking at the spec, we can determine how far out this is from where it's supposed to be. According to the spec, we have to be within 12 thousandths. We've got 5 thousandths here. It looks like 6.5 thousandths. So from the look of this, we're definitely within tolerance on the wear here. Now I'll be replacing the thrust bearings anyway, since all the bearings are going to be replaced. This engine's seen 80,000 miles, and there's no reason to reuse the bearings. So I will be pulling all these bearings out and redoing them, but this gives an indication that the crankshaft has not seen any significant wear. It's still within its tolerances for being reused. And that is in line with the rest of the engine. The rest of the engine is very clean. It has not been overly worn anywhere. So it looks to be a pretty easy rebuild, as we're probably not going to have to do too much work on this engine. Okay, now we need to measure the play between the connecting rod big end and the web of the crankshaft. And each one of these is going to have to be measured. So what I have is a set of Miata Toyo. These are our thickness gauges, so also known as feeler gauges. And this goes anywhere from 0.1, so extraordinarily thin. You know, this is 1,000, 1.5 thousandths, all the way up to, I believe, 35 thousandths here. These are the two thickest ones on the outsides to protect the thinner gauges within, but the idea here is that we need to measure the distance between these two. So we start with the thinnest one that we think is going to fit and just move up from there and see which one does not fit. Now the spec on this says it has to be less than, looks like less than 12 thousandths, and that's a fair amount. So just to validate that, 0.3 millimeters, so has to be less than this. So yeah, less than 12 thousandths. So you could just go through and test with this and just try to fit this in each one, and if it doesn't fit, you're good. But I also want to know exactly what my measurements are, so I'm going to go through and actually take these measurements. Okay, so I'm going to start with, let's see, I'll start with 4 thousandths. So the rest of these, I'm going to push these to the side. I'm going to take out the ones that I need and keep the rest of them tucked away. There's a lock, so as if I rotate this, it locks these in place so they won't fall out. So I'll start with 6 thousandths, and I'll see if I can get 6 thousandths to fit into here. So that fits really easily. You want to see that it drops down inside, and I can slide it easily between that gap. So it's at least 6 thousandths. So I'll kind of fold this back, and we'll try 7 thousandths. I had two of them stuck together there. 7 thousandths also fits. Let's go ahead and move up to 8 thousandths. 8 thousandths fits. It's a little snug. 9 thousandths. Now 9 thousandths is quite snug. I can get into there, but it still doesn't really want to slide much. So 10 thousandths. 10 thousandths will not go in. You don't have to force this in. It's just a gentle, either it slips in or doesn't slip in. These are very thin. There's no burrs on these because these are a quality feeler gauge. So this is going to be the limit. So that means that on cylinder 1, our thickness is 9 thousandths, because that 9 thousandths fits right in there, and it doesn't stop. It's a little tight, but it still fits easily. So that's our width. Now, since only 2 of these are available right now, I'm just going to measure these 2. So I'm going to come over here, try to do the same thing. Now on this side, I cannot get 9 thousandths to fit. This will not fit. So I'm going to drop down to 8 thousandths. Nope, 8 thousandths will not fit. Do 7 thousandths. Can't get that in there. 6 thousandths. Still nothing. So that's pretty thin. What I'm going to do is I'm going to push this crankshaft over a little bit and just see if that gives me any more clearance. Still can't fit it in there. So the thinner gauges here. So we started at 6 thousandths. That's where we stopped. Let's go to 5 thousandths. Now 5 thousandths, there you go. 5 thousandths slides right in. So that tells me that cylinder 1 is going to be 9 thousandths and cylinder 4 is going to be 5 thousandths. So I'm going to write those down. I'm going to really quickly replace the Woodruff key and the pulley boss on here just to give me something to grip on as I rotate this crankshaft. I just want to give it a little rotation, and this will make things easier to do without needing any tools that possibly might damage this. Still rotating it in the direction it runs clockwise. I'll bring the other two connecting rods up. So we have cylinder 1, 2, 3, and 4. We measured 1 and 4. Next we need to measure 2 and 3. All right, so test 9. 9 fits. Let's go over to 10. 10 will not fit. So it appears that cylinder 2 is also 9 thousandths. Check cylinder 3. Get my 9 thousandths out, since that's about what we're reading. Cannot fit it. Go back to 8. And 8 slides right into there. So 8 thousandths. And we cannot get 9 to fit. 9 will not move. So 8 thousandths that is. Now the tolerance on these is going to be 12 thousandths. So that tells me that there's no significant wear along here. 9 thousandths is a little close, but we're still not above that or near the limit here. So a couple of these are less, a couple are a little bit more, but they're still all within tolerance. So no problems there. There's no excessive wear. This seems to be a good crankshaft. All right, we're to the point where I believe we're ready to take the connecting rods off and slide the pistons out before we pull the crankshaft. So I've got cylinders 1 and 4 set up here. I'll start with cylinder 1, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to reconnect these once I get them out. So before I do that, I'm actually going to go ahead and lay them out on a paper towel over here on my workbench in order so that everything stays together in the correct orientation and we don't have any mix-ups between these things. So I'm going to try to do one at a time, but I'm also going to refer to the manual to see what they recommend as far as pulling the pistons. Okay, so we're ready to go. It looks like there's a couple recommendations inside the manual for what to do as far as pulling these rods and the pistons. So I'll go ahead and follow those, and I'll show you those as they become relevant here. So let me go ahead and start loosening up cylinder 1. Oh wow, let me stand on this guy. Whoops, make sure we got it. Definitely a tight fit. All right, those are loosened up. I'm gonna go ahead and pull these nuts off now. And I've got my paper towel over there ready to hold these. So I'm gonna lay them out in order. And everything is just basically going directly over and laying in its respective position. So I have a kind of a map of the engine over there. Next up, we need to remove the cap. So this is the cap on the big end of the connecting rod. So I'm going to slowly try to lift this out. See if this is going to wiggle out or not. And it is not really coming. Let me see if there's a recommendation on that. All right, there's no real recommendation, so what I'm going to use is I have a copper hammer here, very soft and very small, and I'm just going to use this to gently tap on this to see if I can get it to move at all. I would be more concerned with these bearings, but I'm not reusing these bearings. I'm using new bearings, so I'm not, super concerned about their condition. These caps also won't be reused since I have new pistons. So it looks like it's coming, but it's a little tight. I'm gonna rotate this and see if that does anything for me. It doesn't look like it. It's definitely loose, but just does not want to come out. I don't want to stick anything between those caps, so I might just wiggle something in. Got a screwdriver here. I'm going to very gently nudge these caps upward, just kind of using the flat part, so I'm not Trying to damage anything, not stick the pointy end in there. Okay. And there we go. We've got the cap off. I don't think that looks too bad, and that went on in this direction right here. So I'm going to take this in this exact orientation and bring this over to my workbench. Now it looks like the bearing shell is still inside of here, and you can see it if I move a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to very gently see if I can't lift this bearing shell out. It really wants to stay in there. Doesn't help that my hands are getting oily from this. Okay. I think I got it. There we go. So that is the bearing shell. So this is actually the surface that rides on the crankshaft. Turn this down a little bit, see if you can get a little better view of that. So I'm going to go ahead and this is in this orientation. So I'm going to go ahead and set this over on the bench. All right, now next up, the piston is actually a little loose. So now the piston can actually be removed. A couple things we got to do firsthand. We don't want to scratch the cylinder walls, and there's these big, sharp, bolts sticking through here. So one of the recommendations is to use a piece of hose on there to kind of cover those bolts up so they don't cause a problem. So let me grab a piece of hose. I just got some old heater hose that I pulled off the engine, and we'll see, this should kind of fit right on there, and it does. And basically the idea there is that now these sharp things won't bump into the side of the cylinder wall and cause damage when it's removed. Next thing, I need to rotate the engine. Something that you may or may not be able to observe around the cylinder is that we've got a little ridge, and you can see how it's shiny and smooth inside of here, and then there's this ridge of deposits. So that's just carbon and whatnot, but the problem is we've got to remove that because that ridge, the piston rings can catch on that ridge. So what I'm going to do is go ahead in there with a wire brush. It's a brass brush. It's very soft compared to the steel, and it should not mar it. So I'm going to use that to go ahead and try to brush out these deposits. You can kind of see them coming out. It's not very thick, it's got a ridge, and we really don't want that to cause any problems. And I can just determine, even looking in here, that it's not scraping the walls of the cylinder or anything like that, because brass is pretty soft compared to the steel lining here. There's a bit more over there that's kind of stuck on there. Let me try to rub this plastic on there. Okay. I think I've gotten all of that at this point. Feel around this, and there's a little bit there, but nothing big. There's no large ridge, which means there's not a lot of wear in the bore. I don't feel any large ridges. There's just that carbon buildup, but apart from that, the bore is really smooth all the way up. I can't even catch a fingernail on it. So, next thing to do would be to pop the cylinder or the piston up out of the cylinder. So I reach down from below and push upwards and slide the piston all the way up. Now the rings are compressed, so that's why you can't just push it right back down in there. You have to have a compressor to squeeze those rings in. So those rings will kind of pop free, and once you get it out, you got to have a compressor to put them back. So it's kind of a one-time deal. So I'm going to kind of push up on this a little bit with my hand, and I'm going to cover it because you don't want the piston to go shooting out. So I'm going to slowly push up and see if I can't get this to pop out. Now, I can grab myself a small piece of wood, and this is just to kind of allow me to push up on the cylinder from beneath. since I can't really reach my hand up inside of there, this will give me a little bit of leverage. Okay, and that's it, basically bottoming out against that ridge. So now what I need to do is push upwards further. There we go. And I'm trying to do this with you guys, be able to see it. There we go. Okay. And there you have it. That piston is freed. There's a lot of junk on the top of it, but there she is. All right. On to the next one. Just wanted to give a couple bits of information about pulling this piston out and some of the things you can look for. So this piston came out just like this. Came out just vertically. Now, looking at the side of this, see if I can get this down here. It's very hard to see, but there's a little line that's kind of stamped right here. Kind of trying to get this thing to focus, but that same line is going to be stamped on one side of the cap. So if I rotate this to the other side, I don't see anything. Rotate to this side, and there's a little, almost imperceptible little kind of tick. And the way that works is that when this slides down, those two kind of little ticks right here and right here, these two will line up. So it's I don't really have a pointy thing, but it's this thing and this thing. These two slots will line up. That slash will line up and show you that you've got the correct All right, well, that is all of the pistons removed. So we can get a quick look down inside the bores here. You can see how shiny they are within. And you've got those little oil squirters down there at the bottom of each one. And you can see the crankshaft right through there. So, all right, we're getting close. We've got all the pistons out. So the crankshaft is now just bare in here. So now all that's left is to pull the crankshaft. What we need to do is to remove the main caps. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of those, and these are what actually hold the crankshaft and its bearings into the block. So as this is spinning, it's riding on those bearings. They look a lot like these surfaces right here, so they're very smooth. And they've still got plenty of oil in there because there's been no pressures, nothing forcing the oil out. So that's why this is still spinning freely, and I'm not damaging it by giving it this kind of gentle spins here with the oil. You can see that oil's been still dripping out of there slowly. So that's what's next. Let me get some, looks like 14mm socket and wrench, and we'll go ahead and take this thing apart. Okay, so we are ready to remove these. Now in the manual it states that we need to remove them in a spiral pattern just like we did on the camshafts. So in this one it's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. As we do this, we've also got to follow the same procedure for the camshafts. We remove them a half turn, then a full turn, and then full removal. I'm willing to bet that these are going to come out just like the other ones where we do a half turn and it loosens the thing up. Got number 1. There's that half turn. Whoop, and it's already loose, so I'm willing to bet I'm going to have the same luck here. I'm trying to think of a good way to do this. 2. That was a quarter turn. So I'm gonna just do the rest a quarter turn because I feel like they're loosening up on a quarter turn. 3, 4. Do this right here. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. All right. Now I have a feeling I'm not going to need this big ratchet. Just going to grab my small ratchet, do the rest. These are terribly loose, so just doing that full turn now, which, yeah, I'm not really sure why they specify a half turn, considering that pretty much loosens these up completely. So I'll definitely go ahead and check these journals afterwards and make sure that the crankshaft is straight, but they're loose, so let me go ahead and pull this off. Now what I'm going to do is also, just like the camshafts, I have my box already punched out to hold these in the correct orientation and location, because these caps will be reused. So because of that, I want to make sure that these are all kept in the right spot. It's important they're kept in the right location here, as well as the right orientation. Now the manual states that on these caps they do have an arrow stamped pointing towards the front of the engine, so orientation might not be as important, but I'm still going to go ahead and check and just see if they do have that stamp. Either way, I'm going to be placing them in the orientation that they came out, so that there's no confusion when I go to put this thing back together. You can hear little noises of oil inside of here as I pull these out. So there's actually like a vacuum in some of these still being pulled by the oil that's in the passages inside the bearings. I'm also going to be replacing these with studs as well. So it says, the manual also stated that you should leave the bolts in because you can use it to lever the caps off, because they're kind of on there kind of tight. right. Ooh, that's definitely got a scent to it. I was pulling these out and the smell was kind of like sulfury, so it has that kind of the smell of like gear lube, you know, like you put in the transmission. Yeah, definitely. Wow, definitely a scent on that, and it's black. The oil's black on that side. Kind of curious if that oil's burnt or whatnot. That does not smell good. Gonna look at this really quick to see if that arrow is stamped. I think what they mean is they mean this little, that little pointer right there points to the front, because I can see that on each one of these there's a little mark that points towards the front. So I'm going to keep this in the same orientation, bring this over my box, and insert that in to the holes I created. Wow, that's definitely got an odor. I see the same oil coming out of this side on the other one. Okay. I hope that wasn't like assembly lube or something that's smelling like that, because that just reeks. Okay. Yeah, definitely the far side, closer to the camera, this side right here, the oil seems to be black on each one of these, and it's not, it's a normal color on all these, so that's very interesting. Make sure those are loose. Just rock this back and forth a little as I lift up. There we go. On this side, it's the opposite. It's the clean oil's over there, and the darker black oil's on this side. Okay, got one more. Okay, there's that. And it looks like all the shells have stayed inside the bearing caps. I don't see any shells left on here. So I believe the next thing to do is to remove, I was supposed to remove this a while back, but I didn't, so go ahead and pop that off. That's the rear main seal. Just gonna set that down here because that's gonna be replaced. All right, so at this point, I do believe the crankshaft can come out. I'm gonna pull my pulley and key out, set those aside. All right, and I think from here, I'm just gonna lift this up, and I need a piece of cardboard to set this on. All right, I've got a piece of cardboard all set. Slowly, oh, it is in there, huh? It rotates freely. Nope. Oh, wow. Yeah, it's just very heavy. It's just very heavy. All right, I lost one of the shells, and there's the other one. There you go. You can kind of see down inside of there now, you can see the oil jets, which are these guys right here. And each piston has an oil jet that shoots up against the back of the piston. And you can see a couple of these bearing shells are still inside of here. That's the shell. And then on this side, you've got the thrust bearing here as well. So this guy is the thrust bearing. Not sure if I can get a focus on that. So that is the thrust bearing right there, and there's a similar one on the other side. So that contains the two thrust bearings that keep the crankshaft from moving side to side. There's the area where the bearing sits on both of those. And there's the final shell there at the end. The bearings don't look burnt or anything. Like, they all look pretty clean. I'm not an expert on this yet though, so I'm going to go ahead and do a bit of research to find out if these are truly okay or not. But from the looks of it, everything is good. So I will go ahead and take some measurements and proceed to order the rest of my parts. Awesome. Well, we made a lot of progress. Got the block finally torn down. So we're just down to taking some measurements and buying a few parts, and then going to the machine shop, getting the block done, and reassembling the whole thing. That's going to be a lot more videos. For now, I'm just going to kind of give you a quick view of what I got here in the floor. All taken apart. Everything's somewhat sorted and ready for some measurements. So I just want to thank you guys for sticking with me through all this, and I hope you keep watching. I promise things will be getting a little more interesting as we start getting into actually building the engine. I just spent probably 2.5–3 hours researching pistons alone tonight, so a lot of information and hopefully a lot of knowledge I can cram into these videos to help you guys out who are building your own engines. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.